heroes. Welcome to On Scene First. I'm your host, Tracy Eldridge. With over 25 years in public safety, I am wicked excited and honored to bring you entertaining, educational, and empowering conversations with public safety difference makers who are harnessing the power of out-of-the-box thinking when it comes to using the latest and greatest must-have technology tools, a people-first leadership approach, and mental health resources to save lives on both sides of the call. Now, on with the show. Welcome. I am wicked excited to chat with today's guest. I'm going to welcome her right out of the gate, Deb Rosaboom. And I'm so happy I got her name correct because it doesn't look exactly the way that it sounds. So I'm excited that I did that. So Deb is here from GeoComm. GeoComm was one of our sponsors for National Public Safety Telecommunicator Week back in April. And I just wanted to have them come on and talk about some of the amazing things that they're doing. But first, I just want to say, Deb, welcome. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you. And I pass it on back to your folks. Thank you so much for your generous donation. Each night that we went live and were able to give away a ton of prizes for telecommunicators across the US. So if you go to my website, even now, onscenefirst.com, telecommunicators can start putting their name in for next year. So I realize that I always often start adding it later and not as many people get to register. So you can go to my website. There is a tab for a National Public Safety Telecommunicator Week. And so what you guys did, your generous sponsorship allowed me to ship all of the items that were sent here or that I had purchased and got here. And it was a lot. Like the post office looked at me like, they have little things you can click and ship and all that stuff. And I'm like, no, pumpkin, this isn't something that I want to do on a regular basis. This is like once a year stuff. So I just want to say thank you for that. Please make sure that it gets back to your folks that is what your donation went to. So we were very
absolutely
pleased.
That's great to hear. Thank you for telling me that. I will make sure to pass it on.
Yeah, super cool. So GeoComm is, when I was with Rapid SOS, you guys were one of the first partners that we had started partnering with to get, high device space location built into integrations and things like that. So I get to know some of the folks on your team pretty quickly. But there was one really important thing that I want everybody to know about GeoComm. And so if you see them at a conference, you need to go up to their booth. You need to tell them Tracy sent you and ask them for a pen.
Oh my goodness. You're one of those.
I am.
You're one of our pen fans.
I am. And I keep joking that I want them to sponsor me. And so we can put On Scene First on one side of the pen and then GeoComm on the other. I don't know what it is about these pens, but they are smaller and they have the little rubber thing on the end.
Yeah, the stylus. Yep.
But they're perfectly sized. And what I use them for is I use them on my trackpad on my laptop and it saves my wrist.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me ask you though.
Yes.
Do you know that they write in 2 colored inks?
I do. And you know how I found that out?
How?
So I found out that it writes in 2 color inks because I was sitting at my desk and it was actually clean and I was writing something. And then I got another call and I went to the bathroom and I got up for the 15th time to go to the refrigerator to look and see if there was something different there. And then I must have been playing with it because then I started writing again and it was a different color.
And so now I'm out your sanity, maybe.
Yeah. And now I'm looking around. I'm like, where I was just writing in blue. Like, why is it black now? And then I finally realized that it was however you turn the pen, half of it's black and it's blue. And when I ever told that story and Ty was standing next to me at one of the conferences, he's like, what? I'm like, you don't know that your pens write 2 different colors? And he's like, no.
This is kind of pervasive. You know how I learned? They write two different colors.
From Ty?
No, I think the first year that we offered them as swag, I want to say, I'm trying to remember, this might have been 5 or 6 or more years ago.
Yeah.
And Cheryl Benjamin, who's my co-chair on the Nina's NG911 data model work group, she was, I don't remember if she was retired at the time or not, but she was at the conference. She picked one up and then came back and was talking to us at the booth hours later, maybe the next day. I was like, yeah, these pens are really great. And it's my favorite thing. They write both colors. And everyone at the booth was blown away.
What?
And I want to say that our marketing department was well aware. However, that just didn't make the memo of our like booth kickoff. You know, it wasn't something that was noted about the pen. It was like, here, we've got pens.
And they're
I don't
amazing
remember
pens.
getting the full like, and these pens are awesome because they write 2 different colored inks and various other reasons. It's just suddenly they were a hit, and they are a very popular pen. And we get people that come back at state conferences, at national conferences.
That's me.
They come back and they load up on the pens. Like, I gotta get more of these pens.
Well, and I'm very happy to see. So you used to have blue ones, now you have red ones. So now I have both red and blue.
Okay.
And the red's a really sharp color red. So now enough of that. I mean, yes, it's important, but we're going to hopefully get some folks at your booth and just make sure. And maybe I'll leave some stickers there too. So if somebody comes to the booth and says Tracy sent me, then you can give them one of my stickers. How about that? Yeah. We'll make that happen because I know they'll be there.
I love it.
Dispatchers love their pens.
Oh yes. And swag. All swag.
Exactly. So you mentioned working with Nina on some GIS stuff. So before we jump into the actual geocom and the mapping and all that stuff and what you guys have to offer, can you tell me how you got your start in public safety? Like, where did you come from? How long? That just sounded like a Cotton Eye Joe song.
Yeah.
Where did you come from?
I know, right? I wondered if you were going to start singing. No. So it's funny. I'm a GIS person, right? And as most GIS people, I went to school for natural resources. So, you go to school for GIS. There's no national programs or real study or coursework on GIS for public safety, or certainly not for Next Gen 911. Sporadically, there's some universities and places that have developed coursework, but I went to school. I don't know. I won't say the year, but in any case, they weren't giving classes on public safety GIS, right? So I was thinking I was going to do ecology and field biology and do all these wonderful things with the Park Service and whatever. But then every job I was looking for required GIS. So I was like, well, I should figure out what that is. And I went back and I ended up liking it so much. I did the master's certificate, got my GIS, and then I was in St. Cloud, Minnesota. And hey, a local company was hiring for GIS folks. That company is Geocom. And I got into it, and it's been almost 20 years that I've stayed with them. And I've done almost a dozen different positions at this point. And it's from gathering the data, making the layers, gathering like field data. I moved to rural Georgia and collected GPS points of every quote habitable structure over 6 months and lived in a fishing village. And that was kind of wild. And then came back and I was doing more data builds and cleanup and maintenance work. And then I ended up running a team of GIS people and then on to being a project manager. And from project manager, I went into like a consultant kind of role. And then eventually I moved out to Oregon when we acquired a small GIS outfit that was doing similar public safety GIS work out in Oregon. Yeah. And so I took over, managed that acquisition and ran that team for a few years before I moved into my current role in product and did some solutions engineering there in the middle. And so just done a ton of things. But it's all around public safety GIS. And as I've been, evolving in my career, I've gotten more and more involved in Nina's development work groups for all the different standards and informational documents. Anyone that's not aware, and most people are aware, right, of NG911 GIS data model, the structure for GIS data. That's the fuel for all next gen systems, right? So,
and Deb, you'd be surprised at how many people don't, right? So we've been talking about this for a wicked long time.
Yeah.
But there are definitely folks out there who are not familiar with it. So I hope we can peel back some of those layers, is just kind of give like a general overview of it. And I also know that there's some folks, like I had a conversation with somebody from Massachusetts today who wants to get more involved, wants to, she feels like there's more to this career for her. And she's kind of been in a smaller center. And I came from a smaller center in Massachusetts too. And our state 911 department are the folks that deal with all that stuff. So a lot of times we're not even exposed to it. So maybe this might be, a good place to just maybe give a quick overview of the next gen GIS and why that plays such a pivotal role. And then we'll kind of get into what you guys are doing. But I think having that foundation would be good.
Oh, absolutely. I teach this all the time, actually. So
look at that.
Yeah. So 911 systems today are by and large still functioning off of most of the old legacy networks, the telephone systems, the copper wire, landline based networks and architecture that was put in place when 911 was begun. And they're old, they're fragile, they have very limited capabilities with the data pipeline, that it can handle. It can really only handle the voice of the caller and the telephone number. And that factors into your selective routing. So you've got this tiny little pipeline and a small amount of information in addition to the actual caller's voice. That is then, doing tabular lookups and deciding figuring out where that call needs to be routed to based on these kind of old tabular based systems. And then all of the evolution of technology that's happened since 911 came about back in 1968, right? It's evolved into enhanced 911 kind of in the 90s. And then now we're moving towards next gen. And when it all began, it was all landline based and nobody was thinking mobile phones, right? Or any other type of technology, but technology evolves. And all of that technological evolution has had to be sort of reverse engineered to run off of these old legacy networks. And so you have to do all kinds of technological gymnastics, right, to make things work on the networks and the infrastructure that exists today. And that also leads to a lot of outages, potential misroutes, and a lot of things. Now, I mean, obviously it's working, it's functional, but there's lots of risk and sensitivity and just kind of fragility to those systems, right? So
and mapping is kind of a big deal when it comes to 911. I'm just saying.
It's huge. And
right?
So that's the thing, is that you're used to thinking of GIS data and mapping as just what's in the PSAP after the call already arrives there, right? So you've got the map in front of you, you're trying your best to locate that emergency as quickly as possible with the data at your fingertips. But it's all based on how it's routed and how it's been configured kind of on the back end and these legacy systems, right? So it gets there, and you're really, when we're talking about wireless, you're relying on the voice of that caller and their ability to communicate to figure out where that emergency is. In the beginning with the enhanced 911, the alley was coming in, all the phone calls from 911 primarily were coming in from landlines, and it's pre-programmed with a fixed address location where that phone is. That is not the case today. I don't know what the latest stat is. I hear anything from 80 to 90 to 95% is wireless calls today, right?
I would definitely say, I mean, it was 80 to 90% when I first started at Rapid SOS, and that was like 7 years ago-ish. And that was 80. In most places, you could get 95 easily, depending on, that area. So we definitely know that it has increased for sure. And it was funny because when I was, trying to get folks to understand the magnitude of device-based technology, I would get feedback from folks like, our mapping system stinks. And it's like, no, it's actually not the mapping system. It's the location that's coming in, right? So happy to have kind of got better there as well. So
I mean, phase one wireless was a big deal, but it's the sector. All it did was give you the sector, and that sector could be omni, it could be sectorized in a wedge pie, right? But it's still a huge range of where that actual emergency is taking place where that caller is.
Yeah.
And then even with phase 2 and triangulation and the ability to tighten in on that a little bit, there's still a pretty large, uncertainty interval around it that the caller could be in.
Right.
So Rapid SOS coming on the scene was just revolutionary, right? And being able to tap into the device-based location and tighten that certain uncertainty to maybe like 10 feet is amazing. And
and like I said, you guys were one of the first that I know it wasn't the first. I wouldn't say that in a sense, but you guys were one of the first. And I just remember seeing, the little icons going, oh my God, like this is it. This is really happening. So obviously GeoComm is wanting to advance and get us into this next place. So let's go back a little bit and tell us about GeoComm, because I think there's as we were kind of chatting about your roles there's a lot of different lanes, right? So why don't you give us a general overview of GeoComm?
Sure. So GeoComm started back in 1995, right? So we're what are we leading up to math-wise? Almost 30 years. So
oh my God, I was a baby dispatcher 96.
Yeah, so it's a couple years off, but
let's not do that math.
I know, and there's some wild stories about the company and how it got started, and the first application that was built that they called Mapped Alley, which was a map to display your alley or your landline 911 calls, right? That's kind of how it all got started. But alongside that is, of course, the desire to, well, number one, it was the 90s and enhanced 911 and just the overall construction and assignment of locatable addressing. So GeoComm, alongside with the mapping applications, was a services company from the start, with working with counties to create an addressing system and then go out and collect the data and assign addresses for the first time that were more of 123 Main Street, as opposed to rural route and box style addressing that doesn't tell you anything except the sequence of the mail delivery, right?
Right.
You'd still be amazed how many people wanted to cling on to that address because they don't like change, but it still was, those are the big projects and solutions that got us started, right? And then that was that evolved into a lot of services wrapped around GIS data collection, creation, building road layers, building address point layers, assigning addresses, assigning address ranges to the segments, all of the things that are used in location validation. So when you have that caller that's saying, I'm at 123 Main Street, or I'm at whatever, then the call taker's typing it in, and that's validating against this locally authoritative GIS data. So that's how GeoComm got started, was these solutions and services, and it's grown from there into more advanced tactical mapping solutions, into NG core services, into broader definitions, more GIS services, because a lot of folks now have gone live with all those systems, of course, in the intervening years, but maybe they need some help on the public safety side. GIS technology on the whole has also grown and evolved a lot at the same time. So if you have agencies that are reliant on local government GIS for their roads and their address points and all that data, those local governments are also doing tax revenue GIS data. They're doing public works utilities. They're doing parks and rec. They're doing on and on and on and on and on. So then public safety GIS is just one of a whole slew of priorities and not necessarily always the top. Right. So we offer services to come in and say, hey, we'll help you. We'll clean up your data. If you need us to maintain it for your 911 systems, we can do that. We have, like I said, we've got our own mapping applications, cloud-based and desktop-based solutions. We have NG core services, ECRF, LVF, NCS, just as we participate in the whole public safety solution ecosystem, what we've offered has grown as well. And then because we know how the systems work and operate and function, and then we're also building the data that fuels them. Because if we kind of touched on it before, but at the center of all next generation 911, at the center of all mapping is GIS data, right? Yeah. And GIS data in the beginning and then through the enhanced time frame is really about the map and the PSAP and being able to locate that caller. Next gen takes it the next step. It's also in the PSAP, but it's being used before the call is ever placed. It's replacing your MSAG for validating your addressing and your locations, right? Instead of checking against your MSAG, you're checking against GIS data. And then that information is being used as well when the live 911 call is being routed. Your ECRF has boundaries now, spatial boundaries of the PSAPs that are going to be taking these calls. So you're not just looking at a list of roads and a high-low range and everything that you'd see in an MSAG. You're looking at a polygon that says spatially, where do you take calls? And that's going to cover parks and wilderness and all kinds of spaces that aren't attached exactly to roads.
To an address.
Yeah, or addresses. And you have to figure out, what is your responsibility for receiving these calls, and then determining if you're also dispatching and responding, or then, transferring elsewhere. But the point is that it's GIS data that is first validating before the call is ever placed, and then being used to route the live 911 calls based on the boundaries that are drawn and the attributes behind those boundaries, and where in the network it needs to be sent. So
and I think to where we are today, like this should have been happening a while ago, right? So to finally see these things happening. 2 points I want to make. One, I'm never living at 123 Main Street, because that is where everything happens.
Exactly.
And I use that address in all my training too, right? Like 123 Main Street.
Yeah, or it's Oak Street or Oak Avenue, or there's so many others.
Yeah. And then the other thing is, for my E&P study group students, she said ECRF. What is it? Do you remember? Emergency call routing function. So
there you go.
You're starting to hear these terms. And I think, with a lot of folks that are coming into wanting to take the E&P exam, everything you're talking about right now is stuff that we should be aware of. We should be knowing and understanding, especially when it comes to building out these new systems.
Yeah, absolutely. I think NG911 content is being added more and more into the E&P exam as well.
Oh yeah. Oh,
not
absolutely.
That you have to be a technical expert on it necessarily. It's just the concepts and it's being added more. I think when I took the E&P, it was something like 10% on, technology, GIS stuff.
Yeah, now it's
a sprinkling of next gen.
there's definitely more on there now, but it also makes sense. I know that whenever I would go to conferences and stuff, I was always going towards the warm and fuzzy, how to like everybody in the center, and I would shy away from anything technology. So I'm going to just start off by saying thank you for doing what you do, because I could never, nor would I ever want to do what you do. There's too many details. My ADHD is not capable of doing something like what you do. But I love that you love to do that, because everybody has their lane. And for some, it's a super interesting concept. So
I'm a data geek at heart. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not.
But then you get into the NINA development work groups, and you find kindred spirits very quickly, and people are very passionate. So I remember, when NextGen was really some of the earlier catchphrases I would always hear is things like, "Oh, the MSAG goes away in NextGen, and this happens and that happens." And as I've learned more and as the technology has evolved, I've been like, "Oh, I wish people would stop saying that." Like, the MSAG doesn't just disappear. It transitions to GIS data over time, right? But I learned all that by getting involved, by getting in the work groups. And so when that first version of the data model, the work group started in 2010, and I jumped in and was part of that whole 8-year labor of love to get that standard cranked out. And then afterwards, when it became, the next versions, that's when I stepped into a co-chair role in the group. And you realize there's so much that is going on, and so much that still has to be documented and understood. And technology is constantly going to be evolving, right? Nothing's ever done. People used to talk about end state I3, and I use the term too. I'm like, there's no end state.
Right.
It is constantly, technology is constantly changing. So will the architecture, not in a way that it's throwing everything out and starting from scratch each time. It's just evolving, right? It's building and growing and transitioning into new and different things. But you get involved in those work groups, and people are real passionate. And it's on the technological concepts down to the placement of commas, man.
Oh yeah.
It can be
I worked with Jim Marshall on the NINA wellness standard, the transition from the 2013 standard, and I realized, how challenging it is to number one, like like getting everybody together to have it. And we were doing it right smack dab in the middle of COVID. But what I also know is it is important to get involved. Like I had never been on a NINA committee at that point. And then I was kind of roped into being the chair and I had no idea what I was doing. But the best part about it is we had our fearless leader, Delane, who was, we miss her. But she was such a wealth of knowledge and she had to start somewhere too, right? Yeah. So, there's always somebody there to help you.
Yeah.
As far as those, we'll come back around to the, to the working groups and stuff, because it can be super intimidating. Right.
It can be. Yeah. You don't want to speak up. You don't want to ask what you think might be a dumb question, but there are no dumb questions, right? I mean, there's plenty of opportunity to kind of be a fly on the wall and just listen, or if you feel that you have the experience and knowledge that you want to participate, help shape them, jump on in as well, right? It's you just fill out the web form and you get added to the group and the rest is history, right? And then of course there's been more and more work groups around because GIS plays such a pivotal role. There's something like, I don't know, 12, 15 different documents that all have a GIS component to them.
Wow. And the other thing is having to keep track of what it says over here.
Yeah. So we're really working on that. So it comes down to, obviously, the I3 architecture standard, the GIS data model standard that I've become a co-chair of, and then the CLDXF. That's kind of the trifecta. That's the three together that really govern, GIS data, its use in NG 911 and all of the location elements.
And what was that last one? I don't remember that.
CLDXF.
Yeah, what's that?
It's the profile of PIDFlow, and PIDFlow is the new structure of ALI, right?
Gotcha. So okay.
That's the simplistic explanation of it. And so that's the structure of the location information, but then that gets queried and conveyed via queries on GIS data. So then that has to inform the GIS data. So we're really like tightly enmeshed and working with each other on all of these different documents and versions. Who's publishing when? How big of an overhaul is it? Can we incorporate those changes together? We're trying to sync them up as closely as possible so that there's less and less of an issue of disparate standards with conflicting information that people get confused by. I mean, it's a work in progress, but it's definitely getting there.
Oh yeah. And there's a lot of, it's just a lot of information to kind of download and understand. And like I said, in Massachusetts, we didn't do a whole lot with ours. I know that Massachusetts would take care of all of that stuff and we just knew the bare minimums. And so I know folks are out there that need to get to know this stuff on a different level.
Yeah. And so I've been talking about the standards, but the other thing that's been great is the addition of informational documents. There's been informational documents out there for a while, but something like 6 or 7 years ago, work started on something called GIS data stewardship for NG 911. And that really speaks directly to the GIS data providers that are being asked to do all of this. So there's the standards that give the structure. The structure is important and it assists with vendors and building solutions and all of those things. It's also what the GIS data providers, their data has to be able to transform into it. So they need to make sure locally they have all these things, but then it's how do I accomplish this? So there's a GIS data, right? So there's a GIS data stewardship informational document that came out. The first version was published a few years ago, and then they spun up 2 additional simultaneous work groups because the first version just focused on the PSAP boundary, because that's number 1, calls are not going to route without a PSAP boundary, right? That's what the ECRF requires. It's got to be spatially accurate, no overlaps and gaps, and it's going to route the calls where they need to go. But location validation requires center lines and address points and these other things. And so they spun up a group to focus on center lines, and then another one to focus on the additional service boundaries of police, fire, EMS, right? And because it all has to work together, both for responder information, for call transfers, for all of it. But so the RCL, road center line, and the emergency service boundaries, those actually just completed their work and they merged it into version 1. It's gone through all of the processes and it's now in stable form. So in about, 1 to 2 months, I think that will be officially published and it'll be a great expanded resource for GIS data folks to be like, how do I do this? And what do I need to be thinking about? Because again, the GIS folks, they're doing tax parcels, they're doing utility data, water, sewer, stormwater. It's totally different requirements.
Right.
So stewardship is good. There's other informational documents that are coming out that we're doing a better job of explaining it all and helping people that are being tasked with all of this. So because it's a big deal.
It is a big deal. And so I do have a question specifically about GeoComm as like some of the offerings that you have, but am I correct in remembering that you guys play a significant role with the EPRC as well?
Yes.
The NENA, what is it? Enhanced PSAP
registry and
census.
Yeah, I had to look it up the other day because I always forget what the C stands for.
Yeah, I know EPRC, and
Yes.
so I remember the old, NENA PSAP registry that when I first started at Rapid SOS, I was working off of, and it was not wonderful because it was just dated, right?
Yeah.
Like you don't know, and there were just so many abandoned PSAPs, things like that.
Yeah.
One of the things that I teach about the EPRC in a handful of the classes that I do, because a lot of folks don't even know that it exists. So instead of me explaining kind of what it is, would you give your synopsis of what it is? Because it's a free tool that everybody should have access to in their 911 centers.
Yeah, it's so it used to be, like you said, kind of a tabular lookup. If you just needed to know some contact information of another PSAP, you could just look it up and get some info. But if you don't know what the name of it is, or if you don't know what to search for, that's complicated. So GeoComm contracted with NENA again, maybe 5-6 years ago. Everything is like 5 or 6 years ago in my brain. So I don't. It's
probably like 10.
Yeah. So.
Because technically with COVID, you lost 3 years. So
I know, it's all the time warp.
Those 3 years don't even exist.
I have no idea what year it is. So, so we contracted with NENA to turn the EPRC into a GIS based lookup system. Yeah. So it was taking a publicly available base map. And then taking information about publicly available PSAP boundaries for the entire country. Now, publicly available does not mean always current, relevant, etc. But then it was ongoing services to work with all of the PSAPs that have access to it and are participating in it. We'll take their updated boundaries and make the adjustments as well. And then we publish it out onto this web map that people can access. And then in those circumstances that still happen all too often, where say somebody has a VoIP line and they move across the country and they don't update their address, right? And then the call gets rerouted states away from where it needs to be.
Yep.
Which does happen. And now you're a call taker trying to desperately to search for an address that surely does not exist in your data because you're in Colorado and they're in Michigan. Right.
Yep.
And you don't realize that until you start getting farther and farther into the call. And then by that point, you're delaying the response, just longer and longer, the more time you're taking to figure out where they are based on data that's just not in your data set.
Well, and I know a lot of folks too. So as I start talking about this, before I get into like actually what it is, what you'll, jump in there too, is I will explain to them that, how many of you are jumping onto Google? So once I identify, with Rochester, I lived in Rochester, Massachusetts. That's where I worked. There was a Rochester, New York, Michigan, Minnesota, New Hampshire.
I graduated from Rochester, Minnesota.
Right.
Go Rockets.
we were a super small agency and somebody would call and be like, I'm on whatever. And, I'm like in Rochester, Mass. And they're like, no, New Hampshire. And I'd have to get that call transferred out. And a lot of folks will say today, I could just Google the phone number. And what I will tell you is, again, going back to trying to reach out to PSAPs and stuff, there is a very large percentage of PSAPs that do not put their state on their website. So I could Google Rochester, Minnesota, and I'm getting Rochester, New York. So, this is why we have a lot of missed routes too. Folks will look a number up quickly and they'll get a different state. So keep going because I love this free tool.
Yeah. So to continue the analogy, right? If you're now you can, when you realize they're in a different state, you can go to an actual map and look up their address look it up in a nationwide map that is in the state where they're at. You can determine, because it'll narrow in on the actual PSAP polygon for where they live, and you can pull the contact information for that PSAP directly from the map, so you know it's in the right spot, and then go through the motions that you need to do to then transfer that, well, not transfer, but get that PSAP engaged to handle that call, right? Because that's the other thing, eventually with NextGen, we would be able to just transfer that call, but
exactly. Well, and sometimes, and I'll just throw this out there too, is I had a couple of folks that hadn't manually transferred a call in a really long time. And when the squid hits the sand and you have to figure it out. So here's your reminder to go practice manually transferring a call from your agency to your next agency. Nice. Just hint, hint, wink, wink, right? Because you know it's going to happen now. You're going to get that call. It's somebody else's flaming bag, and now you have to get rid of it. So
exactly.
Here's your reminder.
So the EPRC does a lot of great things. At the core of it, though, is just that capability to log in and look up locations and find contact information for PSAPs that you need to get engaged on an emergency, whether it's directly transferring the call, if it's a neighboring jurisdiction, or if it's across the country, or whatever it is. And you're doing it based on the map, on the actual location of that emergency. And so the other example we talk through is, I live in Oregon. My parents are still back in Minnesota. So if I'm on a call with my mom and something starts to happen and I want to get 911 engaged, right? If I call 911 in Oregon, that's in Oregon. Yeah. But if I, that's another use case, because I will call 911. I'll be like, no, it's not me. It's not where your system is showing me located. It's my mom in Minnesota.
Right. Well, and the other thing, so a lot of folks that listen to me know my passion for multi-line telephone systems and misrouted calls based on, calls going to Northern 911 in Canada and other, emergency call relay centers. And so when that call gets sent to you and it should be somewhere else, you should be able to very quickly identify this information. And the other benefit that I love too is, well, and I'm going to go back to something in a second, but in my agency, my Rochester communication center was absorbed by a regional center. So if I'm in Rochester, I might be looking for a 911 center in Rochester and not be able to find it. Right. So,
well, and that's the thing. The more people that do dive in and provide their information, the better it gets.
That's what I was just going to say.
Absolutely.
So touch on the importance of that.
Yeah. And I'm not sure if you'll have the ability to put the website, in the details of the podcast.
Yeah.
I would do that. And then whoever's listening, whatever PSAP you're a part of, go check the link and see what it looks like for your area, and see if you are a registered user, or how you can become a registered user, or how you can try to link up your GIS resource with submitting your data, so that the entire system can be improved.
Well, because it's consistent with garbage in, garbage out, right?
Exactly.
So you give them as much, and I encourage folks every class that I do. I think the email that you can reach out to until I get it in there is 911eprc@nina.org, and you email them, and there's two different types of accounts. There's the frontline telecommunicator account, where if I'm on the front line, I don't need anybody's permission to get access to that. I have to show that I work at a police department, right? That you have to validate that information. But then there's an admin request, and the admin person is the person that's going to be responsible for maintaining that information. So if you're listening and you're a frontline folk, go back and tell mom or dad, whoever is running your center, that you want this for Christmas.
Well, and it's been great. Yep. It's been great too, where we know there are states that are in the midst of statewide NG911 deployments, and have prioritized their PSAP boundaries. We've also been able to work with state contacts and just bring in an entire state worth of PSAP polygons, which is fantastic to be able to update it. But again, all of those frontline users that want to log in and be able to access that information, I look at it from both sides. There's the use that what you're promoting is totally right. Just go sign up, see if you can get in there and start searching around. And then it's also been great for us on the back end to be able to try to coordinate with some of the state level folks and the data that's being built for NextGen at that topmost level, and then bring that all in, because it does get hard when it's piecemeal, one agency at a time, and a million different GIS sources. We'll take it all, we'll make it work, but
and it's my understanding too, is that Nina just put somebody full time into the role of maintaining this.
Right.
So
I saw that.
So I love that. So before we get ready to I want you to talk a little bit about GeoCom itself, if you had a couple of things that you wanted to let, like, what is the funnest thing? Because I'm a fun person. I'm not a boring person. I like fun. One thing I do want you to touch on, which I will tell you is Z-Access in a minute.
Yes.
Because that's something that we know we talk about all the time. But tell me, what is like the funnest thing you guys are doing right now or working on? And when I say fun, I really mean like productive, that is going to really help that telecommunicator more effectively do their job.
Oh man, I thought I was going to talk about our fun committee.
Oh, we have a fun committee? Okay, we can talk about that.
I mean, I can talk about the other thing too, but
okay. All right. We should at least talk about that and then see, how much time we have left. And so, I mean, in my company, I'm the CEO, which actually stands for Chief Energy Officer. It has nothing to do with like the real meaning of it. So,
right.
You got to have good energy. So, yeah.
No, but really, the people at GeoCom are just are really incredible. I've got a great complement of coworkers that are all very knowledgeable and passionate, and yeah, we've got a fun committee. So when the pandemic hit, the teams of folks doing a lot of the day-to-day work, it was a huge change. And the fun committee existed forever. I was on it back in the day and I did some fun things, but it became even more important with the pandemic and everyone becoming so remote and disconnected, to try to find ways to just bring people together
to reconnect.
Yeah. Virtual events, and from little trivia competitions to, there's also like fitness competitions and step challenges. And
that's great, because we were not moving a lot.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, there's a lot of different things that way. And then what we're working on as a company, like out for the industry, it is some of the vertical location Z-Access stuff that's going on. We've built and released recently something called a vertical location service, and it's because the carriers are now sending that Z-Access, that vertical location element, but I don't know if you've ever seen it in its raw feed.
I have, yeah.
It's gibberish, right?
Yeah, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
No, and so I'll try to verbally describe this without a visual aid, but that's being sent as something called height above ellipsoid. And an ellipsoid is this mythological, idealized, perfect circle of a globe. And Earth is pretty bumpy.
Yep.
And so the height above ellipsoid is a height above a illogical, but scientifically logical, but real world kind of illogical line, right? And so when you have to look at how to translate that into something called height above terrain, because your terrain is where you have all your bumps coming in, right? And how far above the ground is, and can we actually then translate into a floor number, because each floor is maybe 10 feet or 12 feet or 14 feet or something. And so how do you take that value and then translate it? So that's what we've built, is something called a vertical location service that does that. And it's been really interesting to see that compared and then plotted on a 3D map service that shows this sort of, we call it a cylinder of uncertainty, because instead of a flat, the phase 2 circle of uncertainty, you're talking now about also a vertical uncertainty. So how far up, up or down in does it need to go? And then that same XY circle of uncertainty. And so you start looking at 3D building images and this cylinder of uncertainty and narrowing into a caller's location within buildings. And it's been pretty amazing to see that evolve. And I know we're doing a lot of work on that and further offerings with that. We're also really looking at the school safety market and looking at mapping indoor spaces of schools to coordinate more effectively with emergencies, right? And building in all of those hallways and room names and multiple floors of data, so that tragically when events, when they happen, right, there's more resources available to help guide responders, so that if callers are saying, I'm in the gym or I'm in the choir room or I'm in the whatever, you have those rooms mapped and labeled and searchable. And, so it's pretty cool stuff. It's very, very relevant. relevant, very important work that's being done. And it's kind of our latest offering. And that's in addition to all of the still very core, very important GIS data work for NextGen, because there's still a lot of that going on out there.
Oh, yeah.
And whether it's services to help people get there, whether it's tools, if you have a competent, good, energetic GIS department that has the ability to focus on it, or maybe even staffed and directly by the agency, we have tools that can help, tools and solutions that'll help those GIS folks do, just narrow in on the public safety parts of their job and make it simpler for them. So,
and when you were talking about those nuances, so I'll go back, I always go back to when I was with Rapid SOS in sense for some of these conversations, because it was super relevant where I would be doing a education session and I couldn't even finish saying like, hey, we have like you have phase 2, then device based, and we're down to like 5 meters. And they're like, well, what about Z axis? And I'm like, can we get the actual location first? Like, can we start there? Like, how about that?
Come on, let's pause and celebrate.
No, let's celebrate this. I would always joke that when that location would come in from Rapid SOS, it was like The Sims when they had the little green diamond over their head. Like when the officer showed up, there'd be a green diamond on their head, like the location icon. But as you were talking about that, I was remembering when you were talking about like figuring out the floor numbers and stuff. So 2 things came to mind as you were saying that. Number 1, there are a lot of buildings that do not have a 13th floor.
Agreed.
Right. Yep. So that's a challenge. And number 2, I remember going to, I can't remember what state it was, but I know it was in Alexandria, Michigan, Minnesota. I can't remember right off the top of my head.
There is in Alexandria, Minnesota. I don't know if that was the one you went to.
Well, I think it is, but I'm geographically challenged. So I'm super, if you're going to give me directions, please don't use words like east and west.
Oh man.
I'm going towards or away. Yep. Right. And the other thing that at the hotel that they had the conference at in Alexandria, you walked in the door on the 4th floor and it was built into the side of a mountain. So to go to the 1st floor, you actually had to go down from the main floor that you walked in on. So, a lot of folks are wanting this. There just has to be this appreciation that it's a lot. It's a lot to translate. It's a lot to learn. And
and it's important to know that I may be off on my timing of things. I want to say it's the largest, maybe 25 urban markets are where this data is currently coming in your alley, and it's going to continue to expand. Right, it will eventually be the whole country. But what it means is you may already be getting it, and you may not know it, or you may not have your mapping or your CAD system appropriately parsed to show it.
Yeah,
and again, right now in its raw form in the alley, it's not necessarily, doing much for you.
Yeah.
But that's where this translation piece comes in that makes it actually relevant and actionable.
That's huge.
It's huge.
It's huge.
And it's so cool to see it because it's kind of like I'm trying to remember. I want to say that the entire United States, with the exception of parts of Alaska, are actually negative in a height above ellipsoid value. Because like I said, it's this theoretical model of the Earth. So almost the entirety of the United States is actually a negative value when you see it come in for height above ellipsoid. But when you change it to height above terrain, you start to get your topography in there and your buildings and your floors, and it actually makes sense for where you are and the different elevation changes and things like that. So it's just it's really cool to see it turned into something that makes sense, because if I was to see a value that was negative, I'd be like, if I'm in Colorado, I'm not negative anything, right? I'm a mile out of the city, right? So it's just great to see it turned into something useful. But as we're releasing these solutions and things, you just have to be aware too that it may be coming in your alley, it may be available, and whether you may want to see it parsed out to begin with, because or maybe it's too confusing and too much information. But just be aware that it's there. And
start to look for it too. And I know, so some directors, even just the uncertainty, I talk about the uncertainty values a lot in my classes. There's been an unfortunate incident where that uncertainty, looking at the uncertainty could have played a significant role, because there was a question of, were they here at this place that's named that, or here with this place, and the uncertainty was like 25 meters. So that's really close to where you're looking at. So to know that, and when I talk about it, I'll ask folks, do you know where the uncertainty meters are on your alley? And sometimes folks, they don't know. And sometimes it's not being displayed. And it's a matter of reaching out to your provider to say, hey, this is part of phase 2 information and we should be seeing it, right? Like it's been there. So let's use it. Right.
Right.
But then on the flip side, I knew where it was, and never in the history of ever did I say to my officer, yeah, I'm 95% confident it's within 3,000 meters. Right. But there could come a time that data that is available is needed. So this has been a super cool conversation.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you.
You're very easy to talk to.
Thank you. And I'm not even like, I don't love that. Like I always joke, like sometimes I say jokes that are funny, but I will tell you, people think this, but just in case you're somebody, I don't need to know who needs to hear this, but Alaska is not an island near Hawaii, right? So they put it down there on the map. They screw up little kids, and until they have access to a globe, they don't know.
Yeah, right.
But, I appreciate you guys. Number one, I appreciate the time that you're taking to have a chat with me. I would love to, chat more on some things, especially maybe with some stuff with the NINA E&P exam. You guys hold a lot of value with, explaining some of these terms and things like that. So definitely excited to see how that looks, but we got to wrap up, and I'm bummed because we could just keep talking, but
I know we could very easily.
Yeah. So definitely go over. This podcast should be launching. I'm thinking it's going to be launching right before National APCO, which is in Nashville, the first week of August. So that's my hope. So if you're hearing this and you're heading to Nashville, make sure you go over and say hi to the GeoComm folks and get a pen and a sticker.
Please do.
Stickers.
Yes, we love to talk data. We love to talk GIS, next gen, vertical location, everything.
See some of these cool things, and don't forget to go find your access to the NINA EPRC too, and use some of these tools that are available to us, and they don't cost anything. They just your time and understanding, and we're so appreciative that you guys are working with NINA on that. So keep up the great work.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey heroes, we hope you enjoyed the show. Please like and follow me on my On-Scene First social media so you too can keep up with my shenanigans. Remember, stay safe, stay strong, and stay here. We need you.